In this chapter, we will be discussing the union of breathing, valving, and voicing. We will further delve into how breathing, glottal valving, and voicing interact. And the interaction between system components, and specifically source vocal tract interaction, applies especially to resonant voice and speaking. The degree of interaction can vary from person to person and from one phonation type to another. So, an interacting sound generating system. So, what is a system? A system is generically defined as two or more components that can be visualized separately but work together. Humans have a system comprised of three components. So, first, you have your lungs that produce tracheal airflow. Then, you have your larynx that produces vocal vibration. And you have your vocal tract that propagates sound waves. Airflow transmits energy from one system to another. And always remember, there is no sound or speech without air movement. And the degree of interaction is often quantified by a pressure flow ratio between the components. And this pressure flow ratio is known as flow impedance, which can be defined at both the input and output of any system block. So then we have resistance. And resistance can be defined as the slow back and forth movement of air. And it's a simpler form of impedance. And impedance becomes resistance when pressure and flow rise and fall together. It has no time delay or advancement. Now we're going to discuss the maximum power transfer theorem. And if you need more information about it, it is located on pages 254 and 255. So in this theorem, it states that a system is not maximally efficient. However, when the power to the load is maximized. Maximum efficiency occurs when the load resistance becomes large. So if you think about an exercise where you're puffing air through the lips, this would be with highly pursed lips where we are stingy with the airflow. Then there's a trade-off between maximum power transfer to the load and maximum efficiency of power delivery. Although both are considered to be a good thing, some choice has to be made regarding it. And in this theorem, you might think, how does this relate to speaking? So we could think of this as the vocal folds, abducting and adducting consistently, presumably to accommodate the changing flow conditions at the lips. So it appears that this interaction is strong and maximum power transfer is accomplished with some kind of impedance matching between the source and the load.
Now that we understand the concept of resistance and power transfer, let's explore our airway in terms of pressures and flows. So, sensing lung pressure and flow. How do we do this? So start by taking a deep breath. I'm going to just go through this and then I'll show how to do it. Start by taking a deep breath, then hold your hand completely over your mouth in a cupping shape and exhale like this. That pressure that you feel against your hand is your lung pressure. Now, if you try breathing in and out super fast, you'll sense negative pressure and positive pressure. Now, sensing elastic recoil. If you can, get a straw. And to sense elastic recoil, first you get your straw in your hand, take a deep breath, and allow all the air in your lungs to escape through the straw, but use no muscle power to push the air out. Just let the air escape your lungs passively, like this. The pressure you sense in your lung is the elastic recoil pressure, which gets weaker and weaker as more air escapes your lungs. This exercise gives you the opportunity to experience apagio, which is Italian for leaning against the breath. So, what this really means is, and what it's talking about, is the combination of feeling air escape your lungs slowly and sensing the pressure behind it gives the impression that you're leaning against your breath. You're not forcing it out. There's no actual leaning of any body part, but it's that easy, steady release of air with pressure that requires that minimal effort, like muscle effort, that feels more like a lean rather than a push. Sensing lung expansion and contraction. In chapter 3, we are introduced to two different breathing processes, one involving ribcage expansion and contraction, and the other involving abdominal expansion and contraction. To gain sensory awareness of a ribcage movement, you have to do this thing called a roll down, which with your head and your hands just dangling by your side. I need to stand up to do this. Okay. So to gain sensory awareness of your ribcage movement, you have to stand up. You got to do a roll down, which is your head and your arms dangling freely and your torso extended downward. So you're in a position like this. And your abdomen is going to feel greatly restricted in an inward and outward movement. As you breathe deeply, your ribcage will be the primary way to increase and decrease lung volume. So going. So your ribcage is what's moving in and out more, and you're feeling that expansion and contraction. To sense abdominal expansion and contraction, stand upright again. Place your hands on your lower ribcage, but this time the object is not to move your ribcage, so you should not have any movement of your hands. So once you have mastered that, it's going to take a few tries to get that right. It's just your abdomen that's going to move in and out to breathe. Every time you breathe in, your abdomen will extend outward, and the diaphragm, which you can't see or feel, will be moving downwards. And lastly, panting and whispering. Panting and whispering involve a low airway resistance, which means the vocal folds are brought together pretty close, but they're not close enough to produce a vibration. And the glottal flow is large enough to produce turbulence, so like a hissing noise. Let's try it. First, produce an H phoneme normally several times. Ha, 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 ha. Now produce it with like the half amount of airflow. You notice the difference? Next, whisper the sentence, hello, how are you today? Notice that you may need more air to produce that short sentence than you would just normally speaking. The biggest difference in phonated speech versus whispered speech is that in phonated speech, the normal carrier of the sound is voicing. And in whispered speech, that is totally eliminated. Noise becomes the carrier. So that being said, vowels in whispered speech carry way less acoustic energy than consonants. Makes sense, right?
In this section of Chapter 9, we will go into the combination of breathing and valving oscillators with voicing. The breathing oscillator, the valving oscillator, and the voicing oscillator work simultaneously. Oscillation is an established rhythm for breathing by our autonomic nervous system, and an important aspect of autonomic breathing is lung volume equilibrium, also known as stasis. The breathing oscillator has the lowest frequency, 0.1 to 1 hertz, but can go up to about 5 hertz in panting. The valving oscillator is typically between 1 to 10 hertz, used for repetitive adduction and abduction in laughter, giggle, or phrases like he, he. The voicing oscillator is between 100 and 1000 hertz, and also known as vocal fold vibration, which is our fundamental frequency. If we include the pulse register and whistle register, the range can be as large as 1 to 5000 hertz. Controlling vocal fold adduction. Our greatest concern here in glottal adduction training is producing a pressed voice. A pressed voice is characterized as an excessive squeezing together of the vocal folds and requires a lot of lung pressure, which is not optimal, nor natural, nor something that you would see in a realistic setting. Adduction with arytenoid cartilage posturing leads to easy light voice onset. This would be something we use with clients who come in and constantly use a harsh voice onset and are looking to find strategies to lead them to a lighter voice onset to avoid vocal pathologies such as vocal nodules. Adduction with thyroarytenoid muscle control registers, vocal fry register is perceived as post, creaky, or popping phonation, which is not an ideal register to be in for prolonged periods of time, again, due to damage of or potential damage of vocal folds. Adduction for extremely low pitch or low airflows. For this one, the pulse register makes a person more susceptible to voice damage, including glottal fry, low pitch, low airflow, and low volumes. Voice fricatives and the SZ ratio. What is the SZ ratio? It is a test of vocal function to determine if there is any vocal pathology present. It measures vocal efficacy by comparing acoustic power at the level of the glottis. Ideally, the ratio should be 1 to 1. If the S is a lot higher than that, it is typically an indication of a disordered voice. So voice fricatives require two flow resistances to be regulated simultaneously, which are the glottis and the vocal tract. Voicing requires a tighter adduction at the glottis. And how do we get an SZ ratio? To get an SZ ratio, we would require the client to sustain the S as long as possible, sustain the Z as long as possible. We would measure both sustained sounds in seconds, divide the times that we get. We would do this for 2 trials and keep the better trial, which would be the number closest to 1. Anything higher than 1.4 is concerned for possible pathology.
Sensing phonation threshold pressure. Phonation threshold pressure was originally defined as oscillation threshold pressure. This is the minimum steady lung pressure required to self-sustain vocal fold oscillation. For a healthy initiation of vocal fold oscillation and open valve configuration of the vocal tract, pressure must be between 0.3 to 0.4 kilopascal. How can you sense these pressures in your lungs? You can by initiating an ah vowel with a very low audible sound. Voice initiation is unstable at the threshold and is a nonlinear process. This is based on mechanical and aerodynamic instabilities. Threshold pressure is the value between vocal fold barely not isolating and barely oscillating. Higher pitch in individuals, phonation threshold pressure increases. To practice sensing oscillation threshold pressure, you will need a stirring straw, and what you do is you will phonate into the straw. Another exercise is messa di voce exercises. This exercise dates back to the 18th and 19th centuries. It can be compared to turning the volume knob on a radio up or down. The point of this exercise is to have symmetry between acoustic and perceptual rise and full of loudness. Physiologically, underneath can't be symmetric because of unidirectional airflow and lung volume change. As the amplitude of vibration increases, so does the stiffness of the vocal folds. Vocal fold stiffness is because tension-bearing fibers are stretched more. There are two kinds of placements that occur. First, vocal folds are placed in close proximity to each other and adjusted throughout exercise. Second, maximum acoustic power is transferred to the vocal tract, which this power is sensed as a vibration in the facial tissues. How to conduct this exercise. A voice onset followed by a crescendo followed by a diminuendo followed by a voice offset. Use the stopwatch, and for each crescendo through decrescendo into the straw should be up to 10 seconds. Inhalation 2 seconds, crescendo 4 seconds, and decrescendo 4 seconds. Practice these straw phonations at the same pitch and all pitches of an octave. So basically you would use a app with a piano key, and you would have the client produce the A vowel. If it was a female, you could do C4 and you start low. Ah. Staccato voicing exercises. This exercise combines rhythmic breathing with adduction and phonation. It relies on 3 oscillators to coordinate these activities: breathing oscillators, valving oscillators, and vocal fold vibration oscillator. We can explore the exercise by repeating the syllable hi or ha, making sure to maintain stasis in your respiratory system. Useful for establishing consistent voice onset and offset at high pitches. Coordinated voice onset requires airflow in the glottis and adduction to excite the dominant modes of vibration. If posturing and airflow onset gestures are too abrupt, vocal fold mucosa, staccato voicing exercises. This exercise combines rhythmic breathing with adduction and phonation. It relies on 3 oscillators to coordinate their activities: breathing oscillators, valving oscillator, and vocal fold vibration oscillator. We can explore this exercise by repeating the syllable ha or hi, making sure to maintain stasis in your respiratory system. Useful for establishing consistent voice onset and offset at high pitches. Coordinated voice onset requires airflow in the glottis and adduction to excite the dominant modes of vibration. If posturing and airflow onset gestures are too abrupt, vocal fold mucosa is unhealthy, additional modes may be energized, producing aperiodic or unstable vibrations. So example of this would be having a client produce ha like this. Ha, 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 ha. Giggle, trillo, and diacokinesis. In giggle and trillo, the valving oscillator has a natural free-running frequency. The production of vocal bursts at frequencies of 7 to 12 hertz. This occurs without a conscious thought of voice onset or offset. Trillo is a rapid on-off alteration of voicing on the same pitch. It differs from giggle in the length of the bout in control, not spontaneous. Diacokinesis is a rapid alteration of diametrically opposite muscular actions. For voice, the task is a repetition of glottal stop and release on the phoneme. Ratings are made based on rate, strength, and consistency. So for example, you would have a stopwatch and you would have your client produce pa 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 for as long as they could, ta 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 ta, ka 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 ka, and then paraka 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 for as long as they could, and making sure that they had consistency and they stayed at a strength and not got weaker. And a normal rate is 5.2 hertz for young and mid-aged adults. And this is the end of our presentation.